My name is JonBenét's Ramsey, and I'm 5.5.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 4 in the Carnes Order series, the judgment by Judge Julie Carnes in the Chris Wolf case, a defamation lawsuit brought about by Christopher Wolf based on what he felt the Ramseys accused him of in their book, The Death of Innocence. In this episode, we're dealing with the duct tape, some of the evidence found at the crime scene, and crucially, we see how when you make little mistakes in the Ramsey case, it takes you completely in the wrong direction. In this episode, we'll be dealing with the bottom of page 14 of the 93-page judgment, page 15, and part of page 16, until just before the judgment deals with, or the order deals with, the autopsy evidence. Before we get to today's episode, just a big thank you to those who participated in the live stream yesterday. It was good to have quite a lot of you present, even though the subject matter wasn't heavily Chris Watts based. So it was good to get your questions, your feedback, and I think deal with something that is quite interesting. What I do try to do is provide intertextuality where necessary in some of these cases. So sometimes I'd be talking about the Laurie Vallow case and referring to certain aspects of the JonBenét's Ramsey case, such as pageantry. Sometimes I'd be talking about the Chris Watts case and talking about certain aspects, being almost like self-deification, which is an extreme version, but it's certainly making yourself the center of your world, which is, I guess, a narcissistic discussion or discussion about narcissism. And I think that has a bearing to some extent on the Ramsey case as well. So other themes as well, such as entitlement and so on. So it was good to have you guys there, and seeing some of those who participated signing up to Patreon. The Craven Silence is available as an audiobook. I'm up to uploading chapter 9 on Patreon. I'm narrating a book that I wrote in 2016 with my co-author Lisa Wilson. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please do. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Hit the notifications bell. If you're not getting notifications, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and hit the notifications bell. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So midway through page 14, Judge Carnes effectively closes the discussion or the analysis on the garrote and nylon cord and all of that by saying, quote, "No evidence exists that either defendant knew how to tie such knots," end quote. And that is classified as statement of material facts and plaintiff statement of material facts. I'm not sure I agree. I would say that I think it's very likely that Patsy didn't know how to tie those knots. I'm not sure whether the same applies to John Ramsey because of his experience in sailing. I think he had 2 boats, one a yacht and another kind of a speedboat. I think it was called Miss America, but he certainly would have had experience tying knots. And then also John Ramsey in his childhood was an Eagle Scout, and as far as I know, so was his firstborn son, his eldest son, John Andrew. And Burke Ramsey was also studying, or was also kind of going through the motions, becoming a scout. And we know that from Patsy's own Christmas newsletters. So I find it a little, I don't know if the word is amateurish, perhaps the better word is incomplete, not thorough enough to say no evidence exists that either defendant knew how to tie such knots. Now, in fairness to the judge, it was really up to someone like Detective Steve Thomas to deal with that side of things. And obviously, I don't think he did, because he was fixated on, he was focused on Patsy, and so for him it wasn't really necessary. And that definitely is a weakness in Steve Thomas's theory that Patsy did it. How would Patsy have tied those knots? Now, suppose you could argue that Patsy may have had rudimentary knot tying experience. You know, if you setting up art equipment, canvases and so on, you might also have string at the back of those portraits, and that might involve rudimentary knot time. I'm afraid I don't find that very convincing, but I do think that is a very weak part of the Steve Thomas spiel. And I say that with a lot of deference to Steve Thomas. I think his book on the JonBenet Ramsey case is perhaps the best book on the JonBenet Ramsey case, even though it is to some extent misdirected. I don't mean purposefully, just that was the way that he followed the investigation. I don't think one can say that Steve Thomas was completely, absolutely wrong, just that his overarching bias or that his overarching focus was perhaps not accurate. Does that make sense? And so you can kind of not blame the judge for saying, well, you want to accuse the Ramseys of this crime. Well, no evidence exists that either defendant knew how to tie such knots. I think if you had a competent defense team, or prosecutorial team, if you had perhaps even also a bit more time to assemble your evidence, you could have come up with quite a lot of circumstantial evidence that there were at least two people in the Ramsey home that may have known about tying the sort of knots that we see there. And so I see this as an error or a flaw, another error and another flaw in the Khan's order. What do you guys think? I've often heard people saying that there's no way a 9-year-old would be able to tie this kind of knot, etc., etc. You are not a 9-year-old boy, especially if you're a housewife or an adult, and perhaps in your life you were never a scout, or you never had children who were scouts. I've got some of the Boy Scout magazines from 1996, so the official publication for Boy Scouts. I've also got the guidebook, and I can tell you there are chapters dedicated to knots. There are also chapters dedicated to knives. There's quite a lot of there are a couple of references to whittling as well, and camping, and using certain kinds of string and rope. And so once again, if you haven't gotten to know some of the characters involved in the story, then you're going to miss some important subtleties. I do think it was a victory for the defense that the word garrote was or sort of adopted in the court narrative. As soon as you adopt the word garrote, you suddenly transform what you are dealing with, and you also transform everything in the mind of the court, and that is exactly what happened. And it's on these little deviations, these little discrepancies, that a trial can turn, that a judgment can turn. Does that make sense? So going back to the order, quote, further, fibers consistent with those of the cord used to make the slip knots and garrote were found on JonBenét's bed. Although plaintiff agrees that garrote is the instrument used to murder JonBenet, he argues that the cord with which the wrists were tied would not have bound a live child and is evidence of a staging, end quote. That's quite a good point, but I don't think the judge knows really what to do with that. I also disagree that so from what I understand here, it seems as though either Steve Thomas or the plaintiff or both of them or Dana Hoffman is making the argument that the wrists were tied post-mortem as signs of staging. I don't believe that at all. I believe that the wrists were tied before everything happened, and also that the loop was placed around JonBenét's neck, and that she actually volunteered for that in the same way that she volunteered for the cords to be placed around her wrists. The other thing that I think is interesting here is the reference to fibers consistent with those of the cord used to make the slip knots were found on JonBenét's bed. I think that's just quite interesting. It suggests that possibly there was some kind of playful activity or not going on JonBenét's bed. Does that mean that this happened in JonBenét's bed? It's possible. I don't think you can rule that out. The other thing that I think is important to bear in mind is there was a piece of, and it's not mentioned here in the Khan's order, but there was a piece of green Christmas garland, possibly from the Christmas tree, but some of that green Christmas decoration was actually found in JonBenét's hair as well. And what that tells me is that JonBenet likely died close to a Christmas tree. And what we know is there was a Christmas tree in her bedroom, there's a Christmas tree in Burke's bedroom, there was also a Christmas tree in the lounge, but we've got to be careful to exclude other possibilities. I think there's a possibility that there was some Christmas tree decorations in the basement as well, although I tend to think that that is less likely. Another thing that I think you've got to bring into the picture is, again, this is my opinion, that JonBenet was shocked using a electrified railway track, a toy, and so you've got to imagine that where this happened, there had to have been a railway track. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, there were electrified railway tracks in 2 rooms, in the basement and also in Burke's room. Now, it's possible that it could have been moved from another room, such as the lounge or somewhere else, into the rooms that we finally saw in the crime scene photos. And you might ask, what was the point of the electrified railway track? And some people would say, well, it was a torture device. Someone else would say, that is not that, it is a stun gun brought in by the intruder. But I think there's another possibility, which is if you consider that the killing was accidental, then you might have this attempt to resuscitate JonBenet using an electrified railway track. And you might think that that is a proxy for something like, you see it all the time, someone is in a situation where they've passed out. I actually saw it in a Mission Impossible movie, I think, where Ethan drowns or something, or he drowns, and then he's brought back to life using those, I don't know what they're called, they sort of electrified pads, right? And you might think to use something like that, an electrified thing is going to bring a spark someone back to life, right? And so instead of trying to subdue the person in the intruder theory scenario, in another scenario, that trying to spark someone with an electrified railway track might be to try and resuscitate them. That's just a theory, that's just a possibility. I don't know whether the fibers consistent with the cord were found anywhere else. They say it was found on JonBenét's bed, but could they have been found anywhere else? I do think it is interesting that they were found there. I also find it quite interesting that nothing is mentioned in the Khan's order, certainly not as far as we've gotten, and we might get to that, talking about the fibers of Patsy Ramsey's clothing on the sticky side of the duct tape, and that is the next section we're dealing with. Quote, "The black duct tape used on JonBenét's mouth has not been sourced to defendants. Both ends of the duct tape found on her were torn, indicating that it came from a roll of tape that had been used before. No similar duct tape was found in the house, nor is there evidence that defendants ever used or owned such duct tape." End quote. I would dispute I just don't like, as a writer and a narrator, I don't really like the way this is expressed, to say no similar duct tape was found. Other duct tape was found in the house, it wasn't the same kind of duct tape. You might say it's arguing over little details, but it by saying no similar duct tape was found in the house, almost like saying no duct tape was found in the house, where duct tape was found in the house, and sticky tape was used for the gifts. So I just think that it is important to be quite clear. It's in a situation where there's possibilities of staging and cover-up, you've got to be absolutely clear in what you're talking about, and that means you've got to be very educated, very au fait with what you're talking about. Then it says, nor is there evidence that defendants ever used or owned such duct tape. That's quite a strong statement. I'm not sure if it's 100% accurate. It could be, but there does seem to be the possibility that this kind of duct tape was bought at McGuckin's or an army store kind of around the corner. It's not absolute. It's not like there's smoking gun evidence, because the receipts were not, what's the word? There weren't names next to the amounts, in the invoice amounts. But in other words, I think it is better to say, or more accurate to say, it's not clear whether the defendants ever used or owned such duct tape. I don't think you can say there's no evidence that they used such duct tape. I could be wrong on this as well, but as far as I know, and I think you must take what I'm saying now with a pinch of salt, and because it could be not accurate. I'm saying something in my memory tells me that the duct tape at the back of the painting of JonBenét's, was either painting or framed photo, was actually similar to the duct tape found. I could be wrong about that. It might also just be that there was just duct tape found behind that. I just remember that standing out as quite interesting evidence. I'm not going to go into that right now just because I don't have the time to do it. You guys who know the case very well can maybe respond to that in the comments, but I do think it is worth going into. Then, and there's a lot of this going on in the Khan's order, these sweeping statements that shouldn't be as absolute as what they seem to be. Then, this is quite interesting, quote, plaintiff also notes that the strip of duct tape found on JonBenét's mouth had a bloody mucus on it and a perfect set of child's lip prints, which did not indicate a tongue impression or resistance, end quote. Now, this is a very compelling piece of evidence, because what it suggests is that the duct tape was placed on JonBenét's mouth either when she was unconscious or after she died, and it doesn't really make any sense. I think if you very caught up and bewildered and sort of on this roller coaster ride of the intruder theory, you're going to find all sorts of excuses for this piece of evidence to make sense. You're going to say, oh, no, so what happened was JonBenet was stun-gunned and the intruder then put duct tape over her mouth so that she wouldn't scream when she regained consciousness. I find that just ridiculous, because there's bloody mucus on it, and basically what is happening here is that JonBenet was actually, it seems as though JonBenet was actually dead when the duct tape was applied. And who on earth would apply? Think about another scenario here where JonBenet is dead and a duct tape is applied over her mouth to make the crime seem different to what it is, in the same way that the ransom note is doing that. Who would do that? Who would want to do that? Who would dress up a crime scene to make it look more severe in a way than it actually was? And I think the nomenclature calling the toggle rope, whatever you want to call that, and I think it's important to think about what those knots actually are, rather than referring to it as a slip knot. Identifying those knots, identifying the string, identifying the contraption we're dealing with, looking at other examples. Bear in mind a garrote tends to have either a loop on both ends, right, to put the hands through, or it has a stick or a some kind of object, a handle on both ends. This one doesn't. This one has a handle on one end and a loop on another end. And there's something like that in Boy Scouts that is quite idiosyncratic. It's called a toggle rope. And so there's a huge difference whether you're going to call something a garrote that isn't quite corresponding to a garrote and something that's a toggle rope. Now you might argue, well, it's not quite corresponding to a toggle rope either. Then it talks about animal hair alleged to be from a beaver was found on the duct tape. And then it says nothing in the defendant's home matches the hair. Dark animal hairs were found on JonBenét's hands that also have not been matched to anything in the defendant's home. I find that quite incredible that these animal hairs were also found on her hands. I know one of my early assumptions in this regard was that Jacques was in the house, the family dog, and that opened up all sorts of ideas, but I don't think that is the case. What I also think is a bit disingenuous in this statement, maybe not purposefully, but what is a bit strange is to say something like, well, animal hair was found on the duct tape. Well, it was found on the inside of the duct tape, as far as I understand. Again, there's no mention of the fabric of Patsy's clothing, or matching the colors of Patsy's clothing found that night. Now, the animal hair could have come from a fur coat that Patsy was wearing. It could also have come from gloves that Patsy was wearing, where you have the fur lining and the gloves. It could also have come from shoes or boots with a fur lining like that. One thing I do know is that Patsy left the house wearing a fur coat. Now, how on earth can you say nothing in the defendant's home matches the hair if what Patsy was wearing she left the house in? Do you get what I'm saying? It's just ridiculous to say, well, the suspect that you're talking about who wore the same clothes the whole night, she leaves the house in those clothes. Obviously, you're not going to find anything in the home matching that, right? So it just feels like the order is missing a little bit of insight, and it is unfortunate that Dana Hoffman, as far as I know, didn't appear in person for the defense, which I think counted against him. I've dealt with the bloody mucus on the perfect set of child lip prints in another episode in the JonBenét's series, but just to come back to it, you know, there was no blood found in JonBenét's ears, or in not an excessive amount of blood in her mouth or even in her nostrils and in her lungs either. And what that suggests is the hemorrhage she suffered to her brain was significant but not perhaps life-threatening. If it was life-threatening, you would have had a lot of blood. There would have been blood coming out of the actual site of the wound, but there would also be internal hemorrhage and blood coming out of, you know, her mouth and her ears and that kind of thing, and that is not the case, which suggests that to some extent the bludgeoning was, although severe, she could possibly have survived it. So if we go to the next section of on page 15, it refers to, quote, several recently made unidentified shoe prints were found in the basement, imprinted in mold growing on the basement floor. I don't know why that doesn't refer to the wine cellar, because it wasn't anywhere else. In particular, a shoe print of a high-tech brand mark on the sole of a shoe was found. Defendants do not own any high-tech brand shoes, and none of the shoes found in their home match the shoe print marks. This, again, I find very upsetting. It's upsetting seeing something like this in a judgment, when we know that a high-tech, that Burke did actually own high-tech shoes, and this was actually mentioned in, I think, some deposition somewhere. I think it slipped out. It was something that was part of Burke's grand jury testimony, as far as I know. It may also have been brought up by either Doug Stein or Fleet White's son, but it definitely came up there. And apparently Patsy bought Burke high-tech shoes, I think when she went to New York or something like that, but apparently Patsy purchased them. This is very hard to come by information, but it is you can find it. So to say that the defendants do not own any high-tech brand shoes is, as far as I'm concerned, not accurate. Then it refers to another partial shoe print was found near where JonBenét's body was found. The shoe print left only a partial logo. The owner of the high-tech shoe that made the shoe prints at the murder scene has never been identified. Oh, really? And then it refers again to statement of material facts. Oh, is this a fact? Plaintiff's statement of material facts. Oh, is this a fact? In addition, on the wine cellar door, there's a palm print that does not match either of the defendant's palm prints. That's from page 16. The individual to whom it belongs had not yet been identified. Now, I don't really know whether the judge knows this or not. The language is a little bit misleading to say the individual had not been identified. Doesn't it mean has not been identified? In any event, as far as I know, one of the palm prints was linked to Melinda Ramsey on the wine cellar door. So just in terms of the high-tech boot print, it's actually mentioned by Charlie Brennan in the Rocky Mountain News on August 23rd, 2002, that the high-tech print in the mold on the floor of the Ramsey's wine cellar has been linked by investigators to Burke, her brother, who was 9 at the time. That although they say they believe it was left there under circumstances unrelated to JonBenét's murder, I don't quite know how you can decide that. Like, how would you know that? There seems to be conflicting evidence about the palm prints. From, if you go to the JonBenet Ramsey wiki, then it says that two of, I don't know if there were 3 prints or more, but 2 were matched to Patsy Ramsey and the other to her stepdaughter Melinda in 2002. But it goes on to say that some members of the Ramsey defense team claim that the palm print remains identified, and I think this was based on the police report written in 1998, so it's a claim based on old testimony. So I'm just going to go through the palm print information from the wiki site. This is from Lawrence Schiller, page 239 and 240, published in the year 2000, from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Quote, a palm print on the wine cellar door was identified as belonging to Patsy, and another of Patsy's prints was found on the door to Burke's train room, the room with a broken window. However, another palm print found on the wine cellar door still remained unidentified. Then from Steve Thomas's book, from page 237, published the same year as Schiller's book, quote, there were actually 3 palm prints on that door which the killer had to close in order to lock. We had already determined that 2 of those prints belonged to Patsy Ramsey. Arguing that the third could only be that of an intruder was a stretch, end quote. And then, as I say, from Rocky Mountain News, August 23rd, 2002, quote, investigators have answered 2 vexing questions in the JonBenet Ramsey case. A palm print on the door leading to that same wine cellar, long unidentified, is that of Melinda Ramsey. So you have that information, and then in the Khan's order you have her saying the individual to whom it belongs, meaning the palm prints, has not yet been identified. And I'm not sure I understand how you can say that. Bear in mind the Khan's order came out in March, the end of March, March 31st, 2003, when this article in the Rocky Mountain News came out basically a year earlier, August 23rd, 2002. So, why is there this difficulty in knowing basic things? And now we're going to go through the final paragraph in the Khan's order on page 16 before we get to the autopsy. Quote, finally, items were left behind that defendants assert they did not own. A baseball bat not owned by the Ramseys, found on the north side of the house, has fibers consistent with fibers found in the carpet in the basement where JonBenét's body was found. End quote. Now, again, I find that quite incredible. So the baseball bat lying there on the north side of the house isn't the Ramseys, but there were other bats lying outside as well. So how did they get there? How did so it's a little bit like if you kind of imagine, if I take my house, for example, I've got toys for the dog and the cat lying all over the house, right? Stuffed animals and so on. And then you can let's say one of the stuffed animals, there's suspicion that that's there's some criminal aspect to it, and then I say, well, that stuffed toy isn't mine. All the others are mine, but that one I think someone brought to the house. It just beggars belief, doesn't it? It sort of stretches credibility. There were also golf clubs lying outside, so you're saying all of that stuff, all that debris belongs to the Ramseys, but that particular thing that could have been the murder weapon, that's not theirs. Right? And it's once again a difficult situation, because if they say it's not theirs, how do you dispute that? And I think the only way to do that is you've got to ask other people, but it's quite hard for other people to say definitively, well, I think it belonged to them or not. Do you see how difficult it is? The other thing to bear in mind is you can't really say, it's not as though there was I'm trying to think of a very exotic sport, let's say ice hockey. It's not as though an ice hockey stick was lying there, something that would be very hard to link to the Ramseys. You had Patsy herself playing softball. She was part of a softball league called Mom's Gone Bad. Burke also played, I think, baseball. I'm not sure if it's baseball or softball, probably baseball. So why wouldn't the bat belong to him? It certainly wouldn't belong to JonBenet, I don't think. And there are also photos of Burke where he looks like he's actually got a blue eye, where he's holding a baseball glove. There's a photo of that. So now we've got this crucial evidence. Oh, that bat doesn't actually belong to anybody. Oh, so did the intruder bring a baseball bat and then change his idea and make a garrote? Is that what happened? And the intruder brings a baseball bat but forgets the ransom note and forgets JonBenet, but remembers to take the baseball bat out, but then drops it outside anyway. Why would you take the baseball bat some of the distance, not all of the distance? Why would you leave it there when you didn't have to? It also refers to a rope found inside a brown paper sack in the guest bedroom of the defendant's home, neither of which belonged to the defendants. Now, when I look at that rope, it looks like the same rope used as in toggle rope photos and sketches. It's the same kind of fairly heavy duty kind of rope. And again, it doesn't belong to us, right? And because it's in the guest bedroom, maybe a guest brought it in or something like that. The guest bedroom is actually John Andrews' bedroom, by the way. Maybe it's important to mention that. Then going to the last section of the Khan's order that I'm going to deal with today, quote, small pieces of the brown sack material were found in the vacuuming of JonBenét's bed and the body bag that was used to transport her body, end quote. I think that's quite interesting. What that suggests is that ropes and strings and nylon, whatever, was used on JonBenet before. I'm saying it suggests that, I believe, and I think that actually makes sense, in the same way that I think the sexual interference happened before as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if every time there was sexual interference, there was also this use of the sort of symbolic bonding equipment. Then it also refers to brown cotton fibers on JonBenét's body, the paintbrush, the duct tape, and on the ligature were not sourced and do not match anything in the Ramsey home. End quote. Now, what I find incredible with all of this is there's not a single mention anywhere here about the fibers found on the sticky side of the duct tape matching the colors of the fibers of Patsy's clothing. It is possible that there's a legal difficulty in that. I don't know if Patsy ever gave law enforcement the jacket that she wore so that they could definitively match it to the other. I also don't know whether law enforcement would have tried to source the same kind of jacket somewhere else. That would have made sense. That would have been good investigative work, buying the same kind of jacket and then doing the same kind of tests. It's possible that they did do that. If they did, I'm just not aware of it. It might be in Steve Thomas's book. I'm just not 100% aware. But the fact that the judge doesn't actually mention it here, I find very frustrating. I find it, you sort of wonder how is information being conjured into a different way. Okay, so we passed 35 minutes. I'm not going to take it further than that. In episode 5, we're going to be dealing with the way that the judge understands the case in terms of the autopsy evidence. And again, we're going to be looking at things like asphyxia, what was the actual cause of JonBenét's death. We're going to look at that in more detail. From time to time, I might be doing episodes answering your questions. So if you ask a really good question or a question that I think deserves to be dealt with, then I might put up an episode dealing with your questions. I've gotten a couple of questions after yesterday's live on Chris Watts, and so I might be dealing with that in a video after this one, so look out for that. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.